Today I'm going to be talking about Walt Disney's 1959 animated classic, Sleeping Beauty. Now, fair warning, this review is not scripted, so this is going to be one of my typical rambling reviews where I go all over the place and probably lose coherence a couple times during the review because I've got a lot to say on this, a lot of different thoughts, and we'll see how it goes. I'll try and keep it in some kind of order. First of all, I guess I should give my history with this. Now, I don't want to repeat myself too much from the last time I reviewed a Disney animated classic, which was about a year and a half ago when I reviewed The Jungle Book. Try and remember to link that in the description down below. But the backstory, my backstory for both of these films is essentially the same, meaning I grew up addicted to Walt Disney's animated cartoons. Now, I know to a large extent we all did, but I more so than most, partly because I had parents who were very restrictive with my viewing habits when I was a kid, so I wasn't allowed to watch the other things that the kids were watching. I wasn't allowed to watch G.I. Joe or He-Man or Transformers or these other animated cartoons, nor was I allowed to watch Knight Rider or the A-Team or Miami Vice or Dukes of Hazzard. I'm obviously dating myself with these. I grew up in the 80s, or was a young child in the 80s. I was allowed to watch PBS, and I was allowed to watch Disney, the Disney Channel, and we also had various Disney storybooks around the house and stuff like that. So I blame my parents somewhat for this obsessive interest in Disney that I developed, but perhaps I can't blame it all on my parents. Perhaps there was a little bit, there was a part of me that was maybe a little bit, what's the word, slow to mature, infantile, so that even as I got older, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I was still really into Disney. My classmates thought I was crazy. I remember even as early as second grade, talking with my classmates around the playground. They'd all be talking about G.I. Joe or something, and I'd be talking about Disney cartoons. And they'd be like, why do you like Disney that much? You know, even as somebody who was 7, 8 years old, I was already standing out a little bit from the other boys in my class with this obsessive Disney interest. And yet, I shared as much as anyone the young boys' fascination for violence. And this is one of many possible tangents that we could get into that I'm going to try and largely step around. For whatever reason, men are just fascinated with violence. I don't know. Lately, I've been reading evolutionary psychology, so I guess it's something that's prone to be beneficial in our evolutionary environment to know how to fight, perhaps. But for whatever reason, I mean, it's a silly thing, really, in a number of respects, because it just demonstrates this ape brain that we humans have, where we just get fixated on these stupid things. But it's something that men get fixated on, especially boys. So when I would watch these Disney cartoons, I would enjoy the cartoons overall. I would enjoy the songs. I would enjoy the slapstick. I would enjoy the whole of it. But I would get really fixated on the climactic fight scene at the end and kind of watch those scenes over and over and go back and recount like every blow that was exchanged, every swing of the sword. So even though I was watching different media than my classmates, I guess that young boy's just fascination with the violence or the action part of the movie was still ingrained with me. So anyways, Sleeping Beauty was one of the Disney films that I grew up on. I was just checking this on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia was saying it was only re-released in theaters a handful of times after its initial theatrical release. I'll try and remember to include the Wikipedia link in the description down below. You can check it yourself if I'm misremembering. I believe it was 1970, 1986, and then 1995. I have memories of it being in theaters more than that when I was a kid, and I don't know if I'm misremembering things. Maybe I'm just misremembering things. That would be the easiest possible explanation. I do have one memory, and this I guess this must have been around 1986. I was in second grade or something. It was released in theaters, re-released in theaters. My mom promised we were going to go see it as part of our spring break treat. Our family didn't really travel during spring break at that time. And then I got punished. I had scribbled in my mom's cookbook, long story. And she said, okay, as punishment, you are not going to see the Sleeping Beauty movie. So that was one time I remember it being re-released in theaters, when I didn't see it. I mean, the thing is, I have memories of actually having already seen it by that point, which is part of the reason I wasn't so upset about that punishment, mildly upset. Maybe it had limited releases that aren't included in that Wikipedia entry, or maybe I'm just misremembering. Who knows? But at a certain point, we got it on video cassette. I don't remember if we bought it or if we taped it off the Disney Channel. In those days, if you're old enough to remember, you would tape off of TV onto a video cassette. But then we watched it numerous times over. But then I had not seen it for, I don't know, 30 years, like from childhood until now, or at least had not seen it in its entirety. So I think I saw clips here and there and stuff like that. But happened to rewatch it the other day. Here's a couple of things. This is things I also touched on when I was talking about the Jungle Book a year and a half ago. For whatever reason, these animated Disney movies are easy to find on YouTube, or at least the older ones are. And I don't fully understand what's going on there, because, I mean, I know YouTube has always been a game of whack-a-mole between the copyright holders and the people who upload stuff. And at any given time, there's tons of illegal stuff on YouTube, or stuff that's uploaded without the permission of the copyright holders. It strikes me that perhaps, I don't know, as AI gets more sophisticated, maybe those days are going to be numbered. We've always just assumed for the last close to 20 years that you could always just find stuff on YouTube, but maybe the algorithms are going to get better at eliminating that. But at the same time, when Disney really wants to take something down from YouTube, they take it down, right? You can't find the latest Avengers movie on YouTube, right? You can't find something that's currently playing in theaters now in YouTube. But those animated movies, the older ones especially, I mean, I guess they're older, but like Disney still gets a lot of, those are still important intellectual properties to Disney, right? And this is something not just now. This is something I've been noticing over the years. As a teacher, somebody who works with young children, and maybe as a recovering Disney-phile myself, I've often had the opportunity of searching for this stuff on YouTube and finding decent qualities with the whole movie for a lot of Disney's animated classics just on YouTube. So, anyways, there's a copy on YouTube, and I watched it the other day because I'm trying to get my kids watching more feature-length cartoons. Now, this is another digression that I'm going to try not to go too far down, especially because you've got to be careful about talking about your kids too much on the internet just because of safety and stuff like that. But without giving away too much personal information, my kids have developed an obsessive interest in these little song channels on YouTube, like super simple English songs or stuff like that, Cocomelon. If you have kids, you probably know these channels. They're computer animated and songs, and they and I've talked with other parents. They just get obsessively interested in this, and fair enough. When I was a kid, I remember adults saying that kids always go into a trance whenever the TV is on. So I guess we always went into a trance when the TV was on then as well. But there's something about these very short songs which just makes me worried that it's fostering not so much a television addiction, but an internet addiction where they're just getting addicted to these short videos getting replayed at random. The same way I get addicted to watching YouTube clips. If I'm being perfectly honest. But I don't want to be addicted to watching YouTube clips, and I'd hate to think that I'm seeing that happen to my kids already. So I'm saying to them, okay, you can watch TV. We've got a smart TV up on our house, which is, sorry, not in our house, our apartment. Everything belongs to the landlord. But the smart TV where you can watch YouTube on the TV. So I've been trying to play full-length movies to try and get them interested in, and they just are not interested in it. And I'm scratching my head a little bit because I think, boy, when I was a kid, I used to love these cartoons. And I'm wondering if the age of YouTube has made these cartoons no longer accessible to kids, or maybe it's just my kids, or I don't know. But I've been putting on a bunch of them lately. And keep your eye on this channel if you're interested. I may be coming around to more of them in the next few days. Bambi, Lady and the Tramp, what else? Dumbo. Yeah, because there's a lot of them on YouTube. And because they're partly just put on to occupy the kids during dinner or something, I've only been half watching some of them. At the same time, I have this movie review project that I've been doing for years now. And as it's evolved, I try to review movies. Initially, I was just reviewing all the movies I saw that were new to me. But eventually, as I got more into YouTube, I started doing YouTube videos of movies I've rewatched. So trying to think about how I want to incorporate this into my movie review project. The first time we had Sleeping Beauty on, I only half watched it, but then just in order to give it a decent review, I did actually just go back and rewatch it this morning now in its entirety. And I don't know if I'm going to do that with the other Disney movies that I've been half watching the past couple days as well. So I'm just looking at this timer on my phone. I'm 13 minutes in, and I really haven't even gotten to the review. I do this every time. I just ramble about stuff. Okay, we're trying to get into this. So, like I said, I grew up with this Sleeping Beauty movie. Although, one of the things that I notice now as an adult watching the movie is as a kid, I really didn't have a sense for these movies, places, and history. And I had read up a little bit about this stuff when I was a kid. I'd read some biographies of Disney. I did a couple of school projects on Disney. Like I said, I was big up on Disney. The Disney Channel, which we used to watch, had some specials about the making of these movies. So I knew roughly the years they came out, and I knew the chronology, but I thought of the Disney animated classics as like a package, partly because that's the way Disney presented them. I didn't think of like these movies being made at a point in time and being influenced by the culture and the circumstances of their time. I just thought of them as timeless. So it's interesting as an adult to watch this and think, you see that and you're like, oh boy, that's dated. That definitely screams 1950s. And see what stuff holds up well and what stuff does not hold up well. Although I'm going to try to avoid getting into the trap of saying because something is not concurrent with today's sensibilities, it's bad. maybe just because something is dated doesn't ipso facto mean it's bad. Maybe it was good at the time, or maybe it's our modern short attention span which is out of whack. I don't know. Well, I don't know. Something to keep in the back of your mind. The other thing, of course, is with the internet, you can get so much more information about this stuff. Now, like I said, I had known somewhat about Disney history when I was a kid, but I didn't realize when I was a kid a couple things I've picked up since then. And again, this comes from a Wikipedia entry. Also comes from video Joe the Disney Guy did, which I'll try and remember to link in the description down below. Joe the Disney Guy does really good videos on some of the histories of this stuff. This was the last movie from Disney's golden age of animation. And it was the last movie because it almost bankrupted their studio. So they poured a lot of money into it. I think it was $6 million, if I'm remembering correctly. And it bombed at the box office, and it did not recoup that money. So the subsequent Disney movies that came out in the 1960s, The Sword in the Stone and the 101 Dalmatians and The Jungle Book, were made using a much cheaper process, something that I've heard referred to as the Xerox process, which I don't really understand. I don't really understand the technical aspects of movie making or animation, so I'm not going to attempt to get into that. But you can see it when you watch those movies and compare them to Sleeping Beauty and the movies that came out before Sleeping Beauty, where there is. I never noticed this as a kid, but once it's pointed out to me, you notice that you can see the lines standing out on those subsequent movies in a way that you don't. I think I've heard some people refer to it as seeing the pencil lines. You don't see them as much in the earlier movies. Although, actually, when I was rewatching Sleeping Beauty, I had my eye on this a little bit. And something I never fully noticed as a kid, but you can see it if you look out for it. There is a black line outlining all of the characters. So they don't blend in to the foreground or the background seamlessly. You can see a black line around outlining all the characters. Check this and watch it. You can see that black line. So I don't know, just a little point to keep in mind. But this was, I think this was the last hand inked Disney animated movie. So the last one really made with those colors that pop and that signature Disney style. Except, and this was another thing I didn't fully realize as a kid, but have picked out from the internet and videos like Joe the Disney Guy, is not entirely in the traditional Disney style. There was a stylistic choice made by one of the guys that Walt Disney put in charge of this movie. And Walt Disney apparently was less hands-on with this movie than some of his previous other animated movies, because he was working on other projects. The 1950s is when he was getting into TV and getting into live action and getting into his theme parks, and had like a million different things he was working on. So the guy he put in charge of this made a decision to go with something that looked a little bit more medieval, because it was a medieval fairy tale, and stuff that's more angular than the previous Disney movies. So you can definitely see it in like the designs of the castles and the opening scenes with the horses and the banners, but you can also see it somewhat in the designs of the characters. The lines are more angular and less round than the other Disney characters. Again, this was something that I never would have noticed, or never did notice on my own. but once it was pointed out to me, I noticed it. Okay, so the movie. I mentioned this with The Jungle Book. I think this is true of a lot of these Disney movies. Watching it now as an adult, the first big thing that jars with my memory is how short these movies are. They're just barely over an hour. I remember them seeming much longer as a kid, like I was sitting down to a full feature. But yeah, the thing is, if you have them in the background, like I did the first time, they're over before you know it. You're like, oh, it's just barely getting started. Oh, here we are at the climax already. If you actually sit down and watch them, though, there are a few tedious scenes in the middle that do seem to drag on forever, which may make it feel a little bit longer. The movie opens with something which a series of scenes which make it seem like it does not. Yeah, which sorry, I'm stumbling over my words here. What I want to say is don't hold up well today, or seem very dated today, or don't match today's attention spans. So there's just like this long scene, slow scene where, actually it's not that long, but it feels long. Princess Aurora is getting presented with her gifts, and then the two fairies give her gifts. And for the first two fairies, they go into this little side song, which is not, yeah, these side songs that they have, it's so different than Disney music today. It's like this cheesy choral music, some semi-classical, like but like sung with a whole chorus. That was quite common in those movies back then, but so different than the Disney style nowadays, where everything is like a really catchy poppy tune. And spoilers, by the way. I'm going to assume everyone has seen this movie. The Maleficent shows up and curses the baby, and then the fairies get the idea to take the baby into the woods and raise her for 16 years. And then we cut immediately to when Aurora, or Briar Rose as her fake name, her disguise name, is turning 16 in the woods. And then we have her going out and singing with her animal friends and dreaming of the prince. And I guess you have the most recognizable song from the movie, I Know You, I Walked With You Once Upon a Dream, which was a song I actually kind of liked as a kid. But watching it now, that whole scene with the animals and her dancing around and then the prince coming, you're like, oh, this is just so boring. Yeah, and again, I mentioned I was putting this on for my kids. They were completely bored by this. It was so different than those short, simple animated songs they're used to watching on YouTube. I still think it might be good for them, though, to grow their attention span. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see in 20 years how they turn out. But yeah, there's a couple interesting things here, and I guess we come to Joe the Disney guy, whose review I'm borrowing a lot from. He points out that Aurora herself, Sleeping Beauty, is really barely in this movie, has very little agency, and has very little personality. Personality and agency in this movie goes largely to the three fairies. Who, again, it's interesting to hear the history behind the making of this movie and how this developed. Originally, in the original fairy tale, well, actually, there are a few versions of the original fairy tale. There's, I think, the Perrault version, the French version, and the Brothers Grimm version. And Joe, the Disney guy, in his video gets into how Disney was switching a little bit back and forth between those two versions. In the Brothers Grimm version, which is on my bookshelf up there. I reviewed the Brothers Grimm on this channel a couple years ago. Um, in the Brothers Grimm version, there's like 13 fairies or 13 wise women. They're not fairies. Um, and that includes the fairy who gets the wise woman who gets upset about not being invited and cursing the child, the one that turns into Maleficent in the Disney version. Um, but the originally there was going to be like 7 interchangeable fairies and then 3 interchangeable theories, but and I think that's what Walt wanted, but there was some pushback against him to give the fairies personalities, and the fairies. I think this is part of the movie that holds up really well. They really have vibrant personalities, and again, some of it is a cartoonish sentiment from another era, like Merryweather, who keeps going like, "Ooh." Sorry, that was a bad impression, but gets mad and shakes her chest back and forth. But it works. They're vibrant. They've got personalities which come through on their faces. The voice actresses are good. They're funny. They really carry the movie, which is good because Sleeping Beauty herself is completely forgettable. Well, the other weird thing about this maybe is Sleeping Beauty, and I guess this was inherited right from the fairy tale, but she's only 16. I think in the Brothers Grimm version she was 15. In the Disney one she was 16. And she's falling in love and getting married with the prince already, and you kind of think, ooh, boy, it's a little bit young. What about age of consent laws and all of this stuff? Now, again, this comes from the fairy tale, so I guess in the fairy tale, a lot of these heroines were 16. And also, this was made in the 1950s, which I don't. What was the culture in the 1950s? If the pop songs are anything to go by, I think this point has been made by comedians before. All the pop songs in the 1950s are like sexualizing 16-year-old girls, right? 15, 16, 17, in a way that's since fallen out of fashion. Now, this is another little tangent we could get into, which I'll try largely to avoid, about how much of that was because the audience for pop songs at the time were 15, 16, and 17, and let's not go down that tangent about talking about pop music in the 1950s. But just suffice it to say, I think this wouldn't work so well nowadays. And Prince Philip, or would it? I don't know. How old are the Disney princesses in the most recent movies? Ariel was still a teenager, right? I've not kept up with Disney so much in recent years. How old were the princesses in Frozen? Oh, maybe they are still doing it. I don't know. The thought just occurred to me. I've not been keeping up with recent Disney that much. And when I say recent, I mean like the past 20 years, 20 or 30 years, since I stopped being a kid. But yeah. What else? Yeah, Prince Philip his age is never given, but he looks to be like about 4 or 5 at the beginning of the movie when Aurora is a baby. So, now that's the kind of age gap which, when you're in your 30s, it doesn't matter if somebody's 4 or 5 years older. But when you're 16, okay, I don't want to harp on this too much because I know these are the kind of things you're supposed to let go when you watch a fairy tale. But yeah, something that just sticks out, huh? Now there's a few things about the plot of the movie which don't make sense really. So if you don't remember the movie, the fairies. So Aurora is cursed to prick her finger on her on the spindle before the end of her 16th birthday or something like that. So the fairies hide her for 16 years and then bring her back to the castle on the end of her 16th birthday. And you think, well, what? Why did they hide her for 16 years? and then just why not bring her back the day after her 16th birthday? There's a few little things which don't make sense about that. Now, as I'm rewatching this movie and as I'm remembering how obsessed I was with Disney as a kid, and how some of my classmates in elementary school, the other boys, thought it was a bit strange, I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, this is kind of a strange movie for an 8-year-old boy to like. The singing about the prince, the romance in the forest. Oh, sorry. That's the other thing that doesn't make sense. So, okay. Let me first back up a second. According to Wikipedia, this movie received kind of mixed reviews at the time, and it was a box office bomb at the time. According to Wikipedia, and granted, you have to be a little bit careful about this because you never know how much one review represents how people actually thought. Just the same way that critics can be a little bit out of touch with audience perceptions nowadays. But according to Wikipedia, a few of the reviews they cite, some of the reviewers criticize this movie for being a little bit repetitive with previous Disney movies. And yeah, there are a lot of elements here which are repetitive with previous Disney movies, even though this was still in the early days of Disney history. So there was only like 20 years of history at this point. But starts with the book opening up, which has become such a cliche of Disney movies. Aurora is being entertained by all her animal friends, which is like the same thing as Snow White and to a lesser extent Cinderella. I mean, Cinderella also had animal friends, but they were like domestic animals. Snow White had all the forest animal friends in the same way that Aurora had all the animal friends. And then she completely falls in love with the prince just at the first glance of seeing him. They don't even exchange names, and then they both go away, and they're convinced they're going to marry each other, which is something which has been so cliched and parodied about Disney movies, even by Disney themselves at this point. But was also an element in Snow White and Cinderella. This is how romances just worked in Disney movies at that point. So it's those elements are again, they jar with modern sensibilities, or they've been so parodied by now, but they just seem such a staple of Disney movies, which apparently is one of the reasons critics did not like this movie all that much. They felt it was a little bit repetitive. And certainly as an adult watching it now, and granted I'm watching it in a different era and a different culture with a different attention span, but I'm watching these scenes with the Aurora singing with their animal friends, and I'm thinking, oh, just get on with it. But you know, it largely entertained me as a kid. Oh, but the thing that doesn't make sense, she comes out and she talks to these animals about how she's been dreaming about this prince that she's going to meet. And then she meets Prince Philip, and they dance together, and they fall in love, and then she runs away from him for another really reason that doesn't make sense. She runs away, and he says, "When can I see you again?" She says, "Oh, never. I mean tonight in the forest by the glen." To be fair, I think it's supposed to be a little bit ironic or humorous, like her being so scatterbrained maybe, but it just, if this is the love of her life, like she's convinced it is, doesn't make sense for her to run away from him without really making some sort of concrete plans to meet up again. But then she gets back to the house, and the fairies say, "Oh, you can't possibly marry him. You're engaged to marry a prince." And she says, "But how can I marry a prince? I'm not a princess." And then they say, "Oh, yes, you are." And she breaks down crying. But earlier she had been saying that she was dreaming about this prince who she was going to meet someday. So that doesn't make sense. And if I remember to get around to them, there are a few other details that don't make sense about this. I know it's almost kind of pointless to nitpick a Disney movie, but here I am with the camera on reviewing, so we might as well get into these nitpicks. Right. So to come back to what I was saying before, as I'm rewatching this, I thought, yeah, this is kind of a strange movie for an 8-year-old boy to like. What was I thinking? No wonder my classmates thought I was crazy. But then, once Princess Aurora pricks her finger on the spindle and goes into a sleep, then it really becomes Prince Philip's movie. And then we have about, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes of kind of Prince Philip as the main character, kind of fighting his way out of the castle and fighting the dragon, and those classic scenes which I'm sure everyone remembers more or less. And those hold up really well. And, you know, I think to myself, what were cartoons like in the 1980s on TV? You know, even the ones I really wanted to watch and my mom wouldn't let me watch, like Transformers or G.I. Joe or something, the animation wasn't that great. So I think that rather intense scene about Prince Philip fighting his way out of the castle holds up about as well as any of the cartoons that my classmates were watching on weekday afternoons TV that I wasn't allowed to watch. Now, granted, you have to get through this hour of kind of sappy singing to get to it, but the dramatic climax is really good, and it's, again, thinking back over it, I think it's, unless I'm missing something, bigger and better and more intense than anything Disney had done up to that point. Even something like Peter Pan, which came out a few years earlier, which was maybe more geared towards young boys, did not have a climax as exciting, as intense as this. None of the Disney movies which came out had this kind of climax, right? And then the other thing, Maleficent has this big, dark, evil castle on the mountain. I forget the name of it. Misty Mountain or Dark Mountain or something like that. And the castle is just so awesome. And I'm watching this, I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of like, you know, like Castle Grayskull and He-Man or something like that, but more awesome. It's this huge castle. It's got this big drawbridge, and it's got all these like gothic, scary statues and skulls carved into the rock, and it's made of all these crumbling bricks. And there's this dungeon with moss, and it's just like a classic Gothic castle. And when Prince Philip breaks out and he's fighting against those goblins on the stairs, it reminds me of the Black Cauldron, which was obviously something more geared towards boys and which was more geared towards high fantasy. The same kind of winding stairway. I mean, there's a scene in the Black Cauldron and there's a scene in Sleeping Beauty where there's a winding stairway and they're fighting off the bad guys on that stairwell. And, you know, having made the Black Cauldron connection, I started to wonder that those evil castle scenes from Sleeping Beauty, I wonder how much they influenced epic fantasy as a genre, right? Because I don't know, maybe I'm totally off base here. Let me know what you think. But the movie came out in 1959. Kind of the epic fantasy boom happened in the years afterwards, right? The 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, that's when all that high fantasy or epic fantasy started coming out, right? Now, how much do you suppose that those castle scenes in Sleeping Beauty subconsciously influenced the generations that were coming up who had maybe seen it in theaters, had their imaginations excited by these Gothic castle scenes and the fights in that castle in Sleeping Beauty, and then went on to write stories about epic fights in big Gothic castles, without maybe even recognizing where they had gotten those images from. Especially in the days before the internet and home video, where you'd only see this in the theaters once maybe. But I don't know. What do you think? And I mean, here's another thing which struck me. What were the predecessors to this? So I'm this looking at the dungeon scene in Sleeping Beauty in this Gothic castle, and I think, what other movies have shown us castles like this? Just kind of these evil Gothic castles with these winding stairwells. I mean, sure, they've been in comic books or something like that, but where have they been so clearly depicted? So the fairies, the good fairies, free Prince Philip. They give him the sword and the shield. There's a brief battle with the Maleficent's minions, and there's this dramatic music that's playing, and he fights him off in the stairwell. He jumps to the window. He jumps to the horse. And if you haven't seen this movie for a while or rewatched it, it largely holds up. The fairies are helping a lot. Maybe the fairies are helping too much. It might have been more exciting if Prince Philip had to battle his way out himself, because the evil goblin creatures throw rocks at him, and the fairies turn the rocks into bubbles. They shoot arrows at him, and they turn the arrows into flowers. They pour hot, what is that stuff? The hot burning oil on him, and the fairies turn it into rainbows. They try and draw up the bridge, and the fairies help the horse jump. The Maleficent sees what's happening, and she starts throwing out lightning beams and destroys the road. And then the horse is sliding down the mountain, and then he gets back on the road. And then, of course, Maleficent creates the Forest of Thorns, which Prince Philip is hacking through. And all of this is happening where this dramatic music, it's somewhat repetitive music. So a music major, I'm sure, might find criticism with it. It's just the same kind of dum 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 dum, or something like that. Just that over and over again, kind of going maybe changing pitch a few times. But it does the job. It creates a scene for that. And then Maleficent comes as the dragon. And this is the classic line that I think most people remember, where she says, "Now shall you deal with me, O prince, and all the powers of hell," and turns herself into the dragon. And hearing the word hell in a Disney movie like that, even when I saw it in the 1980s, and now granted I grew up in a sheltered conservative environment, but you're like, oh, did she just say hell? And when this came out in 1959, I'm sure that must have been a little bit shocking. And it's gratuitous, because there's no indication before the movie that she's aligned with hell. I mean, she's an evil witch, but there are always these evil witches in fairy tales. So to add in that gratuitous reference to hell, which makes you now think, okay, so how is Satan involved in this now? Or what bit of an odd line, but it's got a real punch. And then there's a fight against the dragon. Now, again, according to Wikipedia, some of the reviewers took issue with this at the time. They said, it just evolves into a monster movie at the end. It's not even a fairy tale anymore. But it holds up. Prince Philip is charging on his horse, and then the dragon breathes fire, and Prince Philip takes it square on his shield, but gets knocked right off his horse. Now, if I have to nitpick a little bit here, he gets knocked off. He's galloping with his horse. The dragon breathes fire. He gets knocked off his horse. You assume the horse keeps running. But then the horse just disappears, and then later you see the horse in the thorns with the fairies, and you're like, okay, how did the horse get back there? And the other thing, as long as I'm nitpicking, is so he's in the Forest of Thorns, and the Forest of Thorns is established to be just the castle gate. Maleficent sets the thorns on fire, so the tension is going up and up and up, and he's got to climb. The fairies direct him to climb up this mountain. You're like, okay, where did this mountain come from? I thought we were at the castle drawbridge. This little cliff he climbs up, and then he's fighting the dragon right on the edge of that cliff, and you're like, oh, okay. And it's like it's a classic cartoon thing where he gets up on this precipice, which is this little thin thing of rock hanging over, and he's holding his sword here, and you're like, was that at the castle gate? So you can nitpick that stuff, although you're not supposed to, obviously. But yeah, really exciting ending. Now again, going back to what Joe the Disney guy was saying, Joe the Disney guy said Walt wanted this to be his biggest, best movie yet. So I think they really threw everything at that ending. But yeah, the most intense ending to a Disney movie than anything up until then, and I think easily anything for the next 10 years. Maybe more intense than anything for the next 20 years. I don't know. The possible exception is 1973 Robin Hood, when he's in the castle fighting Prince John, fighting the sheriff, and the castle gets on fire. That might be another way where the tension is just ratcheting up. But yeah, I'm not even sure if that's quite as intense. We might have to go. What would be the next Disney movie that had that intense of a climax? Like Cauldron, maybe. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, I guess while we're talking about Maleficent, she seems like, in some ways, a very stereotypical cartoon villain. So she's got all these minions, and the minions themselves are like, well, they're never named, but they kind of strike me as like little goblins. But no two of them look the same. So there's one with like a pig snout and tusks coming out. There's one with like a bird beak. And they look like they could be quite terrifying. And in some of the scenes where they rush and gang up on Prince Philip, they are a little bit terrifying. But they're also portrayed as kind of typical cartoon henchmen, like, I don't know. Like the very, that kind of thing. There's a scene where Maleficent is asking her, after 16 years, why haven't they found Princess Aurora? And they say, well, we've checked every baby cradle. And she said, oh, you idiots, you're still looking in baby cradles. And then she throws her lightning at them and chases them out of the castle halls. And it's, again, as someone who grew up watching cartoons in the 80s, or seeing snippets of them despite my mother, I would still see them from time to time when over at a friend's house or when a babysitter was over. It does strike me as like what became the very stereotypical bad guy cartoon guy and the minions, where the minions are all stupid and the top bad guy is always berating them and terrorizing them. And of course, you think, even as a child, you think, okay, So if these minions are so stupid, first of all, why does this top bad guy put up with them? Why not just replace your minions? And what are these minions getting out of this? Like all they're being is verbally berated and terrorized and I don't know, shocked with lightning in this case. Why are they still part of this? And that's something I thought even as a kid, and I think that's something that most kids think is a very obvious logical hole that you realize with cartoon villains and their henchmen. But again, I wonder, this was 1959. What predecessors were there for this in children's cartoons? Right? There were no Saturday morning cartoons in 1959, right? So was this one of the first depictions of that stereotype? And that scene kind of early on in the movie or halfway through in the movie where she says, "You imbeciles!" and then she's throwing her lightning at them and shocking them with the electricity as they scurry out. Which in the movie you get a couple shots of this. So half of her minions run this way, half of them run that way. So you get a shot of her shocking this group and then shocking that group. That also seems like fairly intense for a Disney movie in 1959. Again, I don't really remember anything like that in any of the previous Disney movies up until this time. So, yeah, there are definitely some scenes in here which are interesting, which I can see where they would have held the interest of 8-year-old me, and I think was much better than the bad quality cartoons which are on TV in the 1980s. I mean, I think now you couldn't say that nowadays, right? Because nowadays the animation technology has improved to the point where you can make cartoons for TV at much higher quality than you could in the 1980s. But in the 1980s, I think good animation was still expensive enough. Or am I misremembering? Yeah. I mean, let me know what you think. But I think to myself, when I compare this with what was on weekday afternoon cartoons or Saturday morning cartoons in the 1980s, then maybe it's no wonder that I really like these Disney animated classics as a kid, much better than anything else, any other cartoons on TV at that time. Yeah. So what else to say about this? Maybe I'll stop it here. 52 minutes is possibly enough time to ramble on about a Disney movie, which is only slightly longer than this review. It's only an hour and 15 minutes. So possibly, depending on how the time goes, some of these other movies I've had on in the background while I'm trying to get my kids to watch them, like Bambi or Lady and the Tramp or something. I'll come back with reviews for those over the next couple days. Or possibly not. I mean, the thing about having kids is you never know when you're going to have time or when you might not have time. But we'll see. I'll make that a goal.